On this episode of Doing the Most, we're going to make wine from jam.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from meat to roast, bake creation, fermentation, and inebriation, doing the most.
What's great about making wine from jam is that jam typically has the right amount of fruit and sugar to get your wine started. All you need to add is a little bit of pectic enzyme, some water, and some yeast. For this jam wine, we found some Apricot Preserves. These are apparently a product of France. Important here is that they include no preservatives. We're also going to be adding some wine tannin, yeast nutrient, and pectic enzyme. Pectic enzyme is actually really interesting. It's sometimes called pectinase, and it's an enzyme that breaks down the cell walls of fruits. We're going to use it here to break down some of the pectin in the jam. So in this Dutch oven, I added some spring water. Bring it up to a simmer and then add all of your jam. This apricot jam was really aromatic, smelled very strongly of apricots. At some point I may switch to saying apricot. I apologize for that. Apricot, apricot, tomato, potato. You're also going to want to clean out all of your jam jars with some water, shake it, pour it into the next one, shake it, pour it into the next one, etc. until you have all your jars cleaned out. You don't want to waste anything that's in your jam. And then, while this is still a little bit warm, I'm adding the pectic enzyme. That's a few teaspoons of pectic enzyme. I may have to add more later. And then cool water to bring that down close to room temperature. But that Dutch oven still is relatively hot. Then I fixed my funnel to my glass jug, and I'm gonna just try and split this evenly between jugs. Now our target gravity for this is 1.09, and that is based off of a recipe from fruit wine maker Jack Keller. You may have stumbled across Jack's site at some point in your winemaking and mead making adventures. He has an incredibly broad depth of knowledge when it comes to home winemaking. And so I want to make sure that Jack definitely gets credit for some of the practices in this video. Topping those up with water, adding a little bit of yeast nutrient, and about 1/8 of a teaspoon of powdered wine tannin to each, and shaking them up. And then we're gonna add 1 Campden tablet. I'm going to split this down the middle, powder it up, and split it between the 2 jugs. Now our goal here is to end up with 1 gallon of product at the end. So I know it's kind of weird that I'm doing this in 2 jugs, but each jug is about 3/4 of a gallon, and then we'll lose about 1/2 gallon of fluff and yeast and lees and all that stuff at the bottom when we rack this off. And then, as usual, I'm fermenting open for the first few days by placing that underneath a paper towel and rubber band. So that way there's a decent amount of oxygen flow into the bottle and it can gas out as it needs to. So 24 hours later, before we add our yeast, we are going to check the gravity on these. And like I said, our target gravity is 1.09. My hope with this was that with just the added water, we're able to get it up to 1.09 and not have to add any added sugar, but I have sugar on hand if that's necessary. So what I'm going to do is sanitize a graduated cylinder and then pull off a sample and test it with my hydrometer. All of these parts need to be sanitized because all of these are going to end up touching wine must that's going to go back into the fermentation vessel. So we just want to be careful about our sanitization processes. I know I've been clear about sanitization practices in the past, but it's always good to have a little bit of a reminder that we need to be careful about sanitizing all of our equipment so no bad yeasty beasties or bad bacteria or microbes get in there and ruin our homebrew. So it's usually best to put our hydrometer in first, and then that way we only pour enough to float the hydrometer off the bottom and we can see what our gravity reading is without pouring too much into the cylinder. And I was kind of surprised here that I somehow nailed the gravity reading at 1.09. So that jug is good, and we'll have to do a hydrometer reading on the other jug to make sure we don't have to adjust the sugar in any way in that jug. And that one came out at 1.09 too, so somehow I nailed that. And in here we're putting D47 yeast to ferment. This yeast is really good about maintaining fruity floral esters, and I feel like with an apricot wine, we're really going to need those fruity esters to exist in the product to kind of give it some of that apricot, like fresh off the tree kind of flavor on that back end. It's often important to choose your yeast based on what you want in your final product. So now these go to ferment. It took a couple of weeks for them to ferment out all the way to 1.0. And obviously you get some interesting sights as you do so. And now it's time to rack those off. You can see some of the separation here. That bottom layer at the bottom is yeast, dead yeast mostly, that's fallen to the bottom. And then there's a layer of gross lees. That's that fluffy apricot gunk that comes out of the preserves. And we're gonna rack both of these off into a single jug, combining the two and trying to avoid as much of that fluffy gunk as possible as we rack it. And this will get more opaque as you rack it because some of that stuff is getting sucked up, but it's okay. That's all gonna settle down and it's going to go clear in the end. This is going into the closet. It will take another few weeks, maybe a couple of months to go clear, and then we'll do an update video. Thank you for watching. I hope you'll try making a jam wine. I'm always really interested to see the different kind of jams people find. And I actually wrote a little bit about this on doingthemost.org in an article about the things that beginner brewers should definitely try fermenting. Jam wine is definitely one of those, and there are some interesting jams out there that you can use to make a very unusual or exotic seeming wine from fruits that may not be available in your area. As always, find us at doingthemost.org or follow us on Instagram and Pinterest at doingthemostok. Thank you, and please leave a comment if you tried this.